Hello, everyone. This is Gary Price. It's time once again for an open access interview. Today, I have the pleasure and honor of speaking with Dr. Carol Tenopir from the University of Tennessee. Dr. Tenopir, thank you for joining us. And if you could give our audience a little bit of background and some of your career highlights, we'll do that and then jump into some questions.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Most of my career has been as a researcher, as someone who observes and studies and has the luxury, I think, of being able to kind of look in at both the publishing and library world. And so that's been a nice way to be able to comment and observe and see how things have changed. I've been an academic since 1980s anyway. Finished my PhD degree at University of Illinois. Before that, I was a librarian. I was a librarian at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and was a systems librarian there in early days of systems. And prior to that, I worked in development of special libraries in Southern California. So my library world has been in both the corporate special libraries and the academic libraries, and then I went back to school and have been in academia ever since.
I should tell our audience that you're speaking to us not from Tennessee, but from Finland. So if you could tell our audience a little bit about what brings you to Finland.
Yeah, so I am in Helsinki, Finland. I am, this year, I will be all year at Hanken School of Economics in Finland, and some of you may know Hanken because it is the home of several prominent open access researchers, Bo Christer Bjork, Turud Hedlund, Mikael Laakso. I'm working with all of them, and they are people who have spent their careers monitoring the open access publishing world, and so it's a real pleasure for me to be able to work with them. I was actually here several years ago as well and did a national survey of reading behavior in Finland in 2006. Actually, it's been 10 years, and so I'm going to be able to replicate that now and look at how things have changed in Finland over 10 years and work with my colleagues here. So I am the see if I can remember the title. I'm the Fulbright Nokia Distinguished Chair in Information and Communication Technologies this year, and it's something that I think I'm the 6th or 7th of the Nokia chairs, and only the 2nd or 3rd people who are looking at kind of the behavioral aspects rather than the technical aspects of scholarly communication.
Can you talk a little bit about those differences between, or I guess to say it again, precisely what you're studying in terms of behavioral impact?
Yeah, so oh gosh, for a long time, since the 70s, I've looked at, for many years with Donald King, who's now retired, looked at reading behavior. That is, how much do scholars, particularly scientists and social scientists, how much do they read, what do they read for their work, and then, because we've been looking at it for so long, how has that changed? I mean, there's some obvious changes. People read more because they can get access so much more easily. The reading of scholarly journal articles is almost completely from e-journal resources, not 100%, but of course very much so now, and it wasn't in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but I got to watch that change, which has been interesting. And then once you get access to things electronically, how does that change the functionality that you look for, the functionality you use, and so all of those kinds of things I've been looking at over time. And one of the things that Nokia would like me to do here while I'm in Finland is not only to look at the Nordic perspective, but also to look at what sorts of functionality in scholarly communications, particularly e-journals, are likely to be needed and accepted by scholars in the future. How do you design things that are useful? You can do a lot of things. Just because you can do a lot of things technologically doesn't mean that they'll be accepted or people will want to use them. So the idea is to match what scholars need in their scholarly materials to do their work, and match that with the capabilities and possibilities.
One question I've always wondered about academics and reading behavior, whether it be on the European side of the Atlantic or the US side, is do we see people actually reading online, or do academics take an article and then print it and read it on paper?
Yeah, it's funny. That's something that's actually changed in the last few years. For very early on in the transition, people still printed on paper. So part of that, it's chicken and egg. Part of that is because most of the articles were PDF and they weren't so great for reading on screen. So people would take a PDF that looked like what they were used to, an article looking like, and print it out and read it on paper. But for the last 5, maybe 10 years, we've seen that shift. People are reading more on screen. Tablets and other laptop devices, and of course a little bit on telephones. And so the idea of reading on screen is not as unusual as it once was. So that's a big change. And of course that has big implications for design of articles. There's still a lot of ties, I guess you will, emotional ties or whatever you want to call it, to the way an article looks and the structure of an article. But as people begin to shift to reading in a different medium, then that structure can begin to change somewhat. You still have to be able to get to the sections that people recognize. If you're a scientist or a medical researcher, you want to shift immediately to methods or findings, for example. But there is some changes possible.
Where are we in terms of developing tools, reading tools, that allows the user, the reader, to interact with the article, whether it be note-taking or going to related resources, that type of thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have tools, and Elsevier started a project, I think 15 years ago, called the Article of the Future. So we've had the possibilities and tools for a long time, and they haven't been wildly or widely embraced. Part of it is because we tend to forget that for most scholars, the act of reading or getting information is just a means to the end. Their end is doing their own work, getting their own publications, working on that. They want it to be as fast and as easy as possible. So some of the tools are just, sometimes it's almost too many tools. How do I choose a tool? Oh, and there's a new, better tool. And the early adopters love that, but the vast majority, of course, just say, okay, let the tools get out of the way and let me do what I need to be done. So we've almost had too many tools. And there has to be some more, I guess, standardization, and I don't mean that with a capital S. I mean standardization just in the way that people are used to seeing things in their tools. So we're kind of there, but not completely with one solution yet.
Where do you see, in terms of the quote-unquote the interactive textbook, do you think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why e-textbooks at this point haven't been as successful as a lot of people thought they would be? They're basically just electronic versions of the print, and they're not creating related resources and other value-added materials into the publication.
Well, that's part of it, and the other part of it is people's expectations for what a publication is and does and how it fits into their life is remarkably conservative. In personal life and in short kind of interactions with information, it seems that people change a lot more quickly than they do in the serious business of reading an article or reading a textbook. They have certain expectations. And it's interesting to me, we always thought that it was an age thing, that is, as younger generations coming in, and especially the generations that have been an E-generation their whole life, that there would be widespread adoption. And yet I'm seeing at the university, the students, it's many of them don't like e-textbooks for whatever reason. They go back to the print. So it's more complicated than age. It might have something to do with the functionality, as you say, and deeper than just It doesn't have the bells and whistles. It's more of the expectations of what you get out of a textbook. So your assignment, read 3 chapters. It's easier to do that in a print book. I'm going to read chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. If your assignment is to do a particular experiment that's part of the, that's linked to your textbook, and the only way you can get there is through your e-textbook, and the materials are there and in your chemistry class, and you're doing that instead of being in a lab or in preparation for a lab, then it's gets adopted more because it's changing the expectation or the assignment. So it's a really deeper change. It's a change in the way we ask people to learn, or the assignments faculty give, or the way students are expecting what a textbook is and will do for them.
You talked earlier, I'm going to go back for a second, with academics, you said they read as a means to an end. Does that also mean that there are opportunities, let's say, for the library to be a curator of their reading? You know what I mean, in terms of not only giving them the article themselves, but actually breaking it down into specific sections, into chunks, if you like, because they don't have the time to read the entire article? I mean, you see the role of the librarian not only to be the provider of information when called upon, but also to kind of be a proactive type of organization, to give people things in small chunks to at least alert them to their availability.
Yeah, so the facilitator of access to information, of course, is still a role of a library. But if we're talking about published information, then that's increasingly not a role that only a library can fulfill. So what you're talking about, chunks of information, if the library is the publisher, it's a publishing kind of thing. It's a design sort of thing. And of course, libraries are often publishers. So but publishers are also not all libraries. So so I would say that's more of a publishing role, whether it's a library or a commercial publisher or a not-for-profit organization, or whoever's doing the publishing, that is designing things in chunks with navigation that people can get to the part they need. And of course, that's been happening. That's not something new. That's been developing over the years, even though people still, when they find an article that they want to spend a lot of time with, they still tend to go to the thing that looks like an article, a PDF. They may navigate and go through the other pieces depending on the purpose of looking at that. Libraries don't have are not the only ones. They don't have a monopoly on that kind of thing, but certainly can be involved in that.
Could you talk a little bit about when you first started getting interested and became aware of this whole open access publishing concept? Where did you first learn about it? What piqued your interest as something that this was something that you were going to study a lot, that type of thing? A little bit of background in the history of open access from your perspective. Sure.
And I think I need to go back before open access, because my first awareness of e-publishing and e-scholarship was not tied to any economic model. I came at it from a library perspective, and the idea is that the library is the provider of these materials. So when I started in this world, it was libraries shifting from a print world to an e-world, and it was very much the library, again, had the monopoly, in a sense, of providing access. That is, through choices of systems, through subscriptions to journals and other materials, and so the library drove those decisions. And we really didn't think too much about the economic model. I mean, we thought about the price, that something costs more than something else, but we didn't question so much the model of a subscription, that the library would be the facilitator between the content creator and the content consumer. And so I was very much involved in the design, the choice, the systems, the content. How do you make this switch to E? How do you teach people how to use the various platforms? I was involved in very early on, long before we ever considered that there might perhaps be another economic model. So the first time I really got involved in the economy of it, I think, is probably in the late 1990s, when we began to look at other models for making things available, and the model of of perhaps the library, when prices began to get to the point that libraries were thinking that we can't afford to continue subscriptions, and the recognition when we began to look at prices of subscriptions and price per article. So Don King and I began to work with publishers to look at what is the actual cost to a publisher, assuming that they're, not throwing the system out, working within the current system. What is the cost for publisher of an e-journal versus a print journal? And because a lot of people made the assumption, well, if you're switching from print to e, then the cost goes drastically down. And so we wanted to see what the various costs were. And of course, the cost of printing something and mailing something is a small fraction of the cost in the current system, the cost of creation, from both the writer's perspective and the publisher's perspective. So that's a small piece of it. You take that out, you still have a huge cost. And what are the ways that you could take that and take the burden off of the library is how I first got interested in it. The thing is, there is still a burden. I mean, there's still a cost, and you either reduce the cost drastically, but you can't reduce them completely, or you shift. You shift the price, you shift the cost to the library in another way, or to a sponsoring organization, or to the authors, or something else. And so that's when we began to look at what are all of the options and what are the implications. And what I'm interested in is the implications from the author's perspective, and from the reader's perspective, and from the library's perspective and publishers.
You worked on, and you presented on, and you will be presenting again in a few weeks on the Pay It Forward project. If you could reflect on what your takeaways are from that project, not only in terms of the actual results, but what you learned in the process of putting together that report.
Yeah, it was an interesting project because, of course, it was speculating what if we had 100% gold open access with author payments. So article processing charges, and what if you shifted 100%? Now, of course, in reality, things don't shift from one to another all at once. It's more of a gradual shift, but we have seen a gradual shift. My colleagues here at Honkin estimate about 19% of journals now in the system are gold open access, which of course is small, but a much larger percent than it was in the past. So the project, it's speculating. It's speculating what if, and what would be the costs to major research universities if there was this shift, if the publishing system remained as it is, the costs, and if libraries were to take the money that they spend now on subscriptions and not have to spend that anymore, what would and instead took that money and used it for author payment charges, what would be the net decrease or increase? So you probably know that because you talked to McKinsey, but the piece I was supposed to do is look at the human side. Okay, so we had teams, including people here at Honkin, that looked at the economic side from both the library and publisher's perspective. But what about the authors? What about the faculty members who would be paying APCs, or would be having them paid on their behalf? What would they think of that kind of shift, not only from the standpoint of their pocketbook, but also just what do they know about open access? What do they think about open access? And kind of look at that whole behavioral side. So we did focus groups at 5 major research universities in North America, and then we did surveys of faculty and graduate students at 4 of those 5 to see, again, we're trying to get opinions, attitudes, trying to anticipate the future by looking at their present and what the faculty and graduate students are telling us, what they believe and what they think they might do in the future. So long story, but what we found in terms of attitudes is it almost looks like a bell curve. it's sort of like diffusion of innovations. You've got very, very strong opinions on either end. You've got the strong opinion of faculty members or graduate students who will not publish in anything except an open access journal, and they do so often on moral grounds. They feel it's the right thing to do to open up scholarship. On the other side, you've got a group of very, very opinionated folks who will never publish in open access because they think it's confounded with predatory publishing or pay to play. And they are seeing the negative side of it will put a stigma on them. They also feel like the temptation from publishers to publish more and more will dilute the quality of the publication. So those are the two end points. In the middle, we found that most of the academics really don't care about whether something's open or not enough to have that make the decision. They might care a little bit, but if they have a chance to publish in a high quality journal, a high impact factor journal, all those kinds of things that have always been true, they will publish there, and that's the vast majority. What it tells me is libraries have a real opportunity to do some education. I think librarians knew that. They also have to really think about there is a unwillingness from that middle ground to use their own funds for sure to pay. So libraries need to make it easy. If they're going to advocate for open access, they have to make it as easy for these folks to pay and have an article processing fee paid as they have made it for a subscription journal. The folks at the major research universities love their libraries and their access. They get access to most of what they need, not everything. But then they have interlibrary loan, and these people were very positive about that. And they want it to be easy as they perceive it now in terms of access. So libraries have succeeded in making that easy. If we switch to an open access, we have to make it just as easy and take the burden off the authors.
I guess we need to talk a little bit about sustainability of a lot of these projects. Is there money out there? Should libraries be involved in finding new funding sources, that type of thing? What is the long-term outlook for a lot of these projects moving forward?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I have spent, as I said, I spent my career being an observer, and I don't want to be an advocate for any one model. And there are some who say, throw the whole system out and start over. And I'm not advocating that. I'm also not advocating, that we have to stay exactly the same. So I want to make that really clear. But right now we're in a world where we've got multiple things going on. So we have subscription only, which works very well in humanities, many social sciences where the prices are fairly low and where the academics are not accustomed to paying article charges. It's something that they haven't done. They may be dominated also by professional societies where getting a subscription may be a perk of membership, and they're hesitant to charge an article processing fee to a member. So that system isn't really broken for a large number of publishers, or the vast majority of publishers are the small publishers, not the vast majority of publications, but the publishers. There's lots of publishers that are a professional society that have 1, 2, 3, 4 journals, etc. And for many of them, it works well. For them to switch to a pure gold model where they're charging their authors, it could be difficult. Again, their authors, a high percent in the humanities, don't have access to funds like in grants. They're not accustomed to it, and so that's a hard sell as well as an economic problem. In many of the physical sciences and medical professions, they have been accustomed to paying page charges or other kinds of charges. They have more grant-funded research, and if the funding agencies are requiring open access, they may make funds available. And so in those cases, I think that the change is happening already and will continue to happen. If a journal changes completely over, then a library is involved with shifting funds that go to subscriptions to shifting to article processing fees, and that can happen. Right now, there's a problem of hybrid journals where the library is already paying, and then the author is asked to pay again, and the library may be asked to pay that. That's paying double, and so that doesn't solve too many of the issues. So there isn't one solution for every discipline. I think that that's been shown over and over again. That's something that in 30 plus years of research have seen, that there isn't one solution that works for every discipline. We're still very much in research and in academia work on norms that have developed in disciplines over many, many years. But what's driving open access, of course, are government mandates and funder mandates. So the funder says you have to have your articles open access. It might be within a certain amount of time, and you have to have your data. We haven't even talked about data open access, and so libraries really are the ones to help out make that happen, because libraries know about preservation, they know about access, and I really think libraries need to take a stand-up role in helping their scholars meet these government funder mandates.
What about the traditional academic publishers basically just reformulating themselves and publishing open access publications? I'm seeing more and more of that. Are you doing the same?
Yes. Again, some, especially if their discipline is mandating it, then they're making the shift over and trying to find out what is the rational number that can be charged, and how do we remain sustainable is a real challenge. It's not a scholarly journal, but the international journal, International Innovations, which is more of a kind of a magazine reporting on scholarship, just announced that they were no longer going to be publishing their magazine, which was funded by author fees because it wasn't sustainable. To me, that's a little bit of a warning bell that you have to make sure that if you make the shift over, that it's sustainable, and that because we don't want to lose the content, libraries really have to be involved in making sure that content doesn't get lost in eagerness to shift economic models.
Could you speak a little bit more about some of the opportunities libraries have, especially within the education realm, educating academics and the like?
Yeah. So I think libraries in particular here, academic libraries or libraries that work with researchers is really what we're talking about here, should be involved in the research process. And part of that involvement is facilitating access, as we always have, but it's also making sure that the scholarly record continues to be of high quality. That would be perhaps funding open access fees for high quality journals and helping faculty know the difference between the high quality journals and a predatory publication, because of course what has happened as we make a shift to open access is there's a lot of predatory publishers that have taken the opportunity to try to lure people in, and not everybody has the time or the knowledge to know that. So helping faculty know what are the high quality venues and how to recognize that. There also, I think there's an opportunity, and it fits right in with the Mission Forever course, is this idea of ensuring the scholarly record is maintained and preserved, and that means repositories, or that means working with publishers or working with each other to preserve and make available into the future the scholarly record. The other thing I think that's really important, kind of it's not a new role for libraries, for many librarians, but it is an important role, is really looking at the whole research life cycle and seeing where the library can help get involved. And it may be a data repository, or it may be helping faculty find places to put the data that's behind their research. Of course, that's something that we haven't spent a lot of time on in the past, but libraries are beginning to get involved in that. And that's this idea of the library being a facilitator and an educator at all parts of research, from the time that faculty members need to, how do I write a data management plan? Here's the data management plan tool, and being involved in that, all the way to making sure that they have access to materials and they're preserved.
I would like to thank you again, Dr. Tenopir, for taking the time to chat with us from Helsinki today. I hope we can do it again, and we'll talk again soon.
Great. Glad to do it.